Welcome back to Face the Nation. Following President Trump's seemingly successful meeting last week with Chinese leader Xi Jinping, Mr. Trump declared himself by tweet to be a tariff man. That word set the stage for some stock market turmoil. Major U.S. market indices took about a 4% plunge, and there are other uncertainties weighing on the markets, including questions about American interest rates. We'd like to now welcome to Face the Nation Ambassador Robert Lighthizer to the broadcast. He is the U.S. trade representative, obviously a very key voice in these talks. But I want to quickly get to a matter of domestic politics first. The New York Times is reporting that you are one of the candidates being considered for the chief of staff job to step into the role being vacated by John Kelly. Is that a job you want?
I mean, let me say, first of all, I love John Kelly. In your whole life, you won't meet 50 people with his qualities of character and grit and determination and devotion. And so I really think he's done a great job for the president. Having said that, now the president has given me what is a very difficult job. I'm very, very happy doing it. And if I focus on it entirely, there's some reasonable chance I'll get it done well. So I'm flattered that the president wants me to be United States trade representative, working closely with him, and I hope to accomplish the goals that he set out for me in that job.
Well, you've got a big job, but just to be clear, has anyone at the White House talked to you about chief of staff?
No.
So what I'm hearing from you is you're not interested in the job.
I haven't spoken to anyone. I'm entirely focused on what I'm trying to do, and it's difficult enough.
It is. Let's get into that then. Today, we heard from Beijing that they have summoned the United States ambassador and demanded some answers about this question regarding Chinese telecom company Huawei and one of their top executives who was taken into custody in Canada this week at U.S. request. How is all of this going to impact the talks that you're leading?
Well, it's my view that it shouldn't really have much of an impact. I can understand from the Chinese perspective how they would see it that way. This is a criminal justice matter. It is totally separate from anything that I work on or anything that the trade policy people in the administration work on. So for us, it's unrelated. It's criminal justice. We have a lot of very big, very important issues. We've got serious people working on them, and I don't think they'll be affected by this.
Has President Trump offered that, I guess, comfort to President Xi? I mean, has he talked to him after the CFO of Huawei was taken into custody?
Not that I'm aware of.
Because for Beijing, since they have direct interest in this company, and they're warning there are going to be consequences, many are wondering if this adds up to essentially a threat that it could impact the talks.
It's entirely a criminal justice matter. It has nothing to do with anything I'm working on.
So you do have talks scheduled to begin when?
We have conversations ongoing. We have had conversations ongoing for over a year on these matters, and they will continue. We have phone calls, and we'll set up other meetings. There's been a lot going on over the time. I really think with all this talk about a trade war, it's important to pull back for a second and say that trade really has increased very much in the last year. It's not down, it's up. Exports are really up. Imports are up, which I'm not as happy about, but imports are up. Trade is up. The United States is very much engaged in trade and doing so very successfully at this time.
This isn't just any trade negotiation, though. This is the world's two largest economies who are locked in this dispute at the moment. So one of the biggest sticking points here has been China's, it's accused of intellectual property theft. It's been accused of this for years and years and years. The president says he wants to maintain U.S. dominance in technology. So what exactly do the Chinese need to do for you to come to agreement?
So let's just put on the table a little bit of background. China has a policy of theft of intellectual property from American and other companies, from forced technology transfer and from cyber theft, and then state capitalism to buy up technology. Technology is the most important advantage that Americans have economically. We are innovators and we are excellent at technology. So you have a policy from China that's designed really to get at this technology on non-economic grounds, and it is one of the most important elements of the U.S. So the president said, do a study to us at USTR. We did a whole of government study. We spent 8 months. We came out with a report. The president then put in place tariffs in order to get China to change this policy. It's extremely important that China does that it opens its market and that it takes these steps. So what are
they promised to do things like that before? This is an inherent part of the Chinese business model.
You are completely right.
So why would they change now?
The first time this came up was 1991 under the presidency of George Herbert Walker Bush. In the last 6 years of the Obama administration alone, they made 10 independent claims or commitments to get rid of some of these things. I believe the reason is now this president has a determination that past presidents have not had. He realizes the seriousness of it. We've followed a different strategy. It's not just a dialogue strategy. It's a strategy of tariffs and taking hard lines. And this president is determined. In addition to that, I think he has a very good relationship with President Xi, and I think that will be another positive factor. But in this case, what we need structural changes, and we need market opening. So we need agricultural sales and manufacturing sales and the like, and we need structural changes on this fundamental issue of non-economic technology transfer.
And what happens if they don't agree to that, as these sweeping changes? I mean, should the U.S. consider a ban on Chinese technology companies? I mean, you had Senator Marco Rubio on this program saying that he wants to introduce legislation in the new Congress to do something like that.
Well, right now, the way this is set up is that at the end of 90 days, and once again, this is, as you say, years, but even in our case, over a year of negotiations. At the end of 90 days, these tariffs will be raised on $200 billion from 10% to 25% if we don't get a satisfactory solution. My hope right now is to focus on that. If there's a deal to be done, we'll make it. The president wants us to make a deal. But as you say, it has to be verifiable. It has to be monitored. It can't be just vague promises like we've seen over the last 25 years.
So you have until March, but you could extend these talks. That's not a hard deadline.
As far as I'm concerned, it's a hard deadline. When I talk to the President of the United States, he's not talking about going beyond March. He's talking about getting a deal. If there's a deal to be gotten, we want to get it in the next 90 days.
The tariffs you're talking about don't have to do with technology, though. In the technology space, will you take action against Chinese firms? Should we expect more actions like the arrest of the Huawei CFO? I know you say that the crime doesn't directly link here, but there are those who say Chinese telecom should be completely banned from American companies.
Well, it's not my position that we should ban telecom from China into the United States. It certainly is true that there will be continuing criminal justice matters that'll go on, that'll come up. There's been a number of indictments. There's been a number of actions in this space generally. For me, those are separate. They're separate from the negotiations. We're looking for structural change and we're looking for market access. That's what we're looking for. The criminal justice process will continue. We have an independent system, as you know, in this country.
So when the markets open tomorrow, can they be reassured that these talks with Beijing are happening and that you're making progress?
They can be reassured that if there is a deal that can be made that will require or assure the protection of U.S. technology, the very heartbeat of all of our economy. It's not just technology. It's everything from services to manufacturing. Even farming is a technology industry now in the United States. We will protect that technology and get additional market access from China. If that can be done, the president wants us to do it. If not, we'll have tariffs.
That is a very big if.
Well, we'll see. It is a very important matter, and there's a long history of having things not work out. So you're right.
Very quickly, the free trade deal you did renegotiate, which is with Mexico and Canada, the USMCA, new NAFTA. How quickly will that move through Congress? Well,
there's a process under the Trade Promotion Authority, so I'm expecting in the next months that it will have a vote on. I would say this
in the new year.
Certainly within the next few months. This is the strongest and best trade agreement the United States has ever negotiated. It's the biggest. It's $1.2 trillion worth of economy, worth of trade. It's the best on labor. It's the best on manufacturing. The IP protections are unheard of in the past. We have currency provisions in there. We have this whole digital trade, financial services. There's a lot of very, very important innovation in here, built on things that people have done in the past. It's the most far-reaching agreement the United States has ever negotiated, and I believe will be a model for future negotiations.
When will the president withdraw from the existing NAFTA that he has said he's going to do?
We'll see that. That's a decision that's up to the president of the United States.
All right. Thank you very much for coming on Ambassador, we'll be right back on Face the Nation with the Managing Director of the IMF, Christine Lagarde. Yesterday marked the fourth consecutive Saturday filled with protests and riots in France, all sparked by French President Emmanuel Macron's economic policies. Charlie D'Agata reports.
Good morning, Margaret. Once again, we witnessed scenes of chaos, destruction, and anger here on the streets of Paris. And these yellow vest demonstrations were held elsewhere throughout the country. They overturned cars, set them on fire, tore plywood off storefronts, and clashed with riot police who fought back with water cannon, tear gas, and stun grenades. The Interior Ministry said today more than 1,200 people were arrested. That is unprecedented in this round of rioting. 120 people were injured, none said to be that serious. We saw a heavy police presence here in Paris, 89,000 security personnel deployed throughout the country. Now, away from the Champs-Élysées, we saw that protesters had smashed windows, they lit fires to barricades. We even saw some young people looting some shops. Now, these yellow vest demonstrations began weeks ago in a protest of a fuel tax hike. President Emmanuel Macron has scrapped that idea, but now there's this whole spectrum of complaints from people that we spoke to, largely having to do with low wages, high taxes, and a distrust of the government. Many are calling for Macron to resign. His approval rating has plunged to around 20%. Now, we're told the president will address the nation tomorrow night, but it's hard to know what he plans to do to calm such widespread anger. Margaret?
Charlie D'Agata, thank you. We're joined now by the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. Christine Lagarde is with us. The IMF is an organization of 189 countries that works to promote global economic cooperation and trade. Madam Lagarde, welcome to the broadcast.
Thank you.
We just saw those pictures of protests in your home country of France. The French finance minister says this is going to have a real economic toll on the country. You used to have that job. What do we make of the kind of anger and economic grievances that we're seeing in the streets there?
Well, those are very sad images. I'm a true Parisian, and to see what's happening in Paris is extremely sad. It will have economic impact, no doubt about it. And I really hope that the dialogue can be re-established, that people can express their views, their grievances can be heard, that they can be addressed as well. I think there is a lot of, interesting developments. It's not all about the yellow vest. There are lots of people who have infiltrated those movements and who are, demonstrating with violence, and that is not the way it should be conducted.
I think these pictures are interesting. If you look at the globe right now, it brings up something I know you've been warning about, which is you see us on the verge of an age of anger. Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that? What are the risks that you're seeing?
Well, the risks are that rising and excessive inequalities between people, aging of societies, and an economic situation that cannot address the concerns of many. And I believe that it's a question of protecting people, having a dialogue, making sure that there is cooperation between nations as well, because what affects one is going to affect all. When you see a pandemic, when you see financial disruption, when you see climate change, it is going to affect all countries. And I think it's critical that all of us be together when facing those issues. The same goes with cybersecurity. The same goes with terrorism. We are in this together, and we have to close ranks and be together.
You heard on this program just a few moments ago the chief negotiator for the U.S. in what are incredibly important talks between the world's two largest economies, China and the U.S. As you say, what happens in one has global impact these days. What do you make of these hardline arguments here that, as the ambassador said, everything has failed when it comes to trying to iron out trade differences? We have to take this hard deadline. Everything has to be agreed to by March, or we will be set for a potential escalation in this trade war.
I used to be trade minister for my country back in 2005, and I know how difficult those negotiations can be and how long it takes to cut a deal. So I wish the ambassador the best of luck in reaching completion of something which will not be ultimately a final trade arrangement, agreement, whatever we call it. I hope they can establish the parameters, the framework, the timeline, the steps along the way, because that's what it takes. But it takes both parties, US and China, to be determined to reach a closure on this. And it's vitally important because trade is a major engine for growth. Trade, if it is damaged, if it is threatened, is going to affect growth, less jobs, less investments, because people suddenly who are in the business of investing, who are in the business of creating jobs, will lose confidence, will be concerned as to what the rules of the road will be, and they need that.
So when you hear the threat of further tariffs, that causes you concern that this will eat into economic growth? Yes,
it does, because if you can model that, and it's as true as a model can be, and reality will determine eventually what the impact is. But if you model complete tariff increases, tit for tats, and all the rest of it, you end up with about 0.8% less growth in a matter of 2 years. Now that's a big number. That means less jobs, less investments, and this is not what anybody wants. So I very much hope that the dialogue, the agreement can be re-established, and that we can come to terms with this.
You are seeing in the marketplace right now some concern that the engines of growth here in the U.S. have been chugging along, but the markets showed some real worry this week. What do you forecast here? Are we headed towards the recession that some fear?
Not in the short term. This is not what we see. We have a forecast for this year and next, which is around 3.7%. It's not bad, actually. And we don't see signs of recession in the near term based on the information we have at the moment. But it is true that if there are more tensions, if trade is under threats, if people sort of wonder, where should I invest? And should I completely change my supply chain? That will have an impact. It will have an impact on people because, if you look at the low-income family today, thanks to trade, the cost of living are reduced by 2/3. So, the clothes that we're wearing, many of the things that we're using are made in Vietnam, Morocco, China, wherever. If we lose the benefit of that, then it will have an impact on consumers. We're not seeing it now, it's true, but that's the threat.
We're coming up on the anniversary of the global financial crisis. You were key in France at the time as finance minister in the global response. Do you see a direct line between what happened then and the kind of dislocations and anger that you're seeing now?
Yes, I do. I do, because I think that some of the legacies of the crisis have not yet been completely healed, and the wounds are still there. Number one. Number two, I think that some people have lost out at that time and have not been able to recover, and they see that some others have been able to recover. So there is that inner sentiment of unfairness. And, we have done our best at the IMF. We've really put a lot of money on the table to rescue countries in particular, because this is our job. The job of the IMF is, it's a bit like if you have a family and somebody in the family is gambling all the time, and nobody is eventually going to lend to that person. So that gambler comes to me as the family unit trustee and says, I need money. What are you going to do? You're going to lend because he says, I can't operate, I can't work out, I can't feed the family. But you lend on the basis that he's going to be de-addicted from his gambling. He's going to rehab itself. That's what we've been doing ever since the crisis started 10 years ago. We've been telling countries, you can't borrow? Okay, we're going to lend you short term. But we're going to ask you to fix your finances. We're going to ask you to work on your deficit. You cannot continue spending more than you earn. And we've done that. Thing is that we are still doing it because some countries have not gone through that path yet.
This week, you were named one of the most powerful women in the world by Forbes magazine. You've been outspoken about the need to be inclusive of women in global economies. What does that actually quantify at? Like, what does it add up to have more women in the workforce?
I'll give you two numbers. In this country, in the US, if there was equal participation of women in the labor market, GDP would be up by 5%. If it operated in the same way in India or in Egypt, for instance, GDP could be up by 27%. So this is not small numbers. It's a big addition to an economy that we want to grow and where we want jobs to be created. Women can be a phenomenal force for growth, for our economies to do better, for more prudence as well. Women are known to be a lot more prudent and less risk takers, which sometimes is not a bad idea. But I would like to celebrate one thing. Chancellor Merkel is now being replaced at head of the party by another woman. That doesn't happen very often. So I'd like to take my hat off to her.
And it's certainly an economic engine there in Europe. Thank you very much, Madame Lagarde. We'll be right back with a report from Yemen. Stay with us. Before we go today, we want to take a look at Yemen, site of what the United Nations has warned is the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Senior foreign correspondent Elizabeth Palmer, producer Agnes Rowe, and cameraman Ian Robbie are in Yemen for CBS News. Here's their report.
Here in the coastal city of Aden, there is no fighting. It's the government of Yemen, elected before the war, that's in control.
One of the cruel contradictions of Yemen's civil war is that there's plenty of food in stable areas like this, at least for people who can afford it. And that's just one thing Prime Minister Abdul Malik Ma'in Sayed, 2 months into his new job, has to try to fix.
There's a real catastrophe, hunger looming.
Yes, that's what's happening.
Is it manageable? Can you deal with it?
We try to deal with it. It's catastrophe now.
A catastrophe caused by fierce fighting. Yemeni government troops have Saudi Arabia's military backing against Houthi fighters supported by Iran. The Saudis' ruthless bombing campaign relies on U.S. weapons and intelligence, though that may be about to change.
The Americans are backing away from the Saudis in the wake of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. Is that going to hurt you?
If the U.S. want to stand with Yemen, they should decide. It's an important location and country. They have a relation with the U.S. for decades.
So you're really saying that there's a big role for America to play directly with the Yemeni government,
Yes.
not going through the Saudis.
The United States cannot ignore the Iranian regime, what's doing into the region, and let them do what they want in Yemen.
The fact is, the Yemeni people are trapped in a regional power struggle between Saudi Arabia and Iran. The Prime Minister's government is clearly on the Saudi side for military and financial reasons. But his plea to the U.S. is, don't let your distaste for Saudi Arabia lead you to abandon us. But the war rages on with cruelty and abuse on both sides. If there's any hope for the Yemeni people, it rests with peace negotiations going on right now in Sweden, where the two sides are actually still talking.
Our Liz Palmer in Yemen. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. We'll see you next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.